In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to debug applications using Visual Studio.net. What does it mean to debug an application? It simply means that we get to stop the execution of our source code and inspect all the variables and all the properties of objects that are currently within scope of the code that's currently executing. It gives us a chance to peek behind the scenes and try to find the source of problems that might be occurring within our applications by slowly watching each line of code as it executes. Now, I rely on these tools daily as a software developer, and I think that you will find the greatest amount of benefit by kind of practicing some of the things I'm going to demonstrate in this video. Because not only does it help you to learn debugging, but it's also going to help you to pick apart other people's programs and understand how applications work and how are they running and how are they designed. So, for example, maybe the first thing that I do when I get onto a new project is that I'm supposed to take over some source code from somebody else that somebody else built. And so invariably what I'll do is go through all the buttons on the user interfaces, and I will set a breakpoint very early in the code and start stepping through each line of code to understand better what the application is doing. So I kind of use it as a learning tool in addition to using it as a debugging tool. Now, what does it mean to set a breakpoint? A breakpoint is simply a stop sign. It tells the compiler to stop running the application, that we're going to control execution from this point on, that we're going to walk through the code and we're going to do it on our own time schedule. So what I'm going to do is find the line of code I want to put a breakpoint on. In this case, mshipper equals new shippers, the first line of code in my btn find underscore click event. And off here to the left hand side in this little gray area, I'm going to click my left mouse button, pop, and you see a red dot and a red line appear. And so this is a visual indicator that we have a breakpoint in our code right there. Now the next thing I want to do is maybe set one more breakpoint. You can have as many breakpoints as you want to in your application. So what you might do is set a breakpoint here. Once the application stops, you can step through a few lines and decide, that's okay, I don't need to look anymore at this chunk of code right now. And you might continue on. You might hit your F5 button or hit the run or start button, and it'll continue executing until it finds the next breakpoint within your source code. So I'm going to set another breakpoint. I'm going to go to my shippers class, and I think whenever somebody changes the company name value, whenever they use the set company name, I'm going to stop the application flow right there and watch as the application executes. So I'm going to go ahead and run the application. Oh, before I do that, let me explain one more thing. As you can see here, I have a special set of toolbar buttons that I obtained by right-clicking in this gray area near the toolbars and selecting the debug option from the drop-down menu. This will give us the debug toolbar. There's a bunch of funny buttons, and we're going to look at each of these in just a moment. So we'll go ahead and run my application now. And I can interact with the application as I always have. I'm going to type in the number 2 and click the Find button. And when I do, notice that I now hit my first breakpoint in code. I am in debug mode right now. We talked about very early in this lesson series runtime and design time. Now we are in debug time. And it's kind of a combination of both of those, where we're still running the application, but we're able to work with it a little bit by inspecting each line of code as it runs. Notice also here at the bottom that we have a series of tabbed windows that appear. We'll take a look at those. And notice also in our toolbar that some of the buttons have now become enabled. Let's take a look at some of these buttons. First of all, we can stop debugging by clicking the Stop button. The next button is the Show Next Statement. So I might be over here looking and referring to some code, and I can get back to where I'm at currently, where my next line of execution is displayed, by clicking this little yellow arrow. And it makes the next line of code to be executed in my viewable area again. Notice that to see what line of code is next going to be executed, the line turns from red to yellow, and we get a little yellow arrow, and it's kind of on top of that red dot in this case, since we're on the line that is actually the breakpoint. Now the next line of code is the step into button. We have step into, step over, and step out. So in this case, we're going to step into a line of code, and by doing so, we're going to get to the constructor of our shippers object. And so here we have public sub new, and it's going to, as we continue to step into, call my base.new. In this case, we have a bunch of private member variables that all have initializers, so we have to walk through each of those. Then we're going to call initialize component. These are all the things that happen behind the scenes. And now I finally arrive back at my btn find underscore click event where we had our original breakpoint. So when I run this next line, it will have successfully executed this, and we now have a new reference to a new shippers object in our mShipper object. Okay, so there's going to be times when you don't want to step through all that code. And when those times occur, what you'll prefer to do is the step over. So in this case, whenever we get to the get shipper method, I don't want to walk through all the code to get the shipper. All I really want to happen is to move down, because I know the problem I'm trying to find within my source code is further down. So what I'll do is click the step over button, and in doing so, I didn't have to drill down into get shipper. I was able to just bypass it. The line of code still executed, we just didn't have to watch each and every line of code execute. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue to run this. We hit another breakpoint. We'll come back to that in a moment. And let's run this again. I'm going to click 3 this time and hit find. And now what I'm going to do is step into this, but I realize that I clicked the wrong button. I don't want to be looking at this anymore. I don't want to step into all of these initializers. So what I can do is click this button, the step out, and it'll put me right back at my btn find underscore click event. And I can carry on from there. So that's a handy little set of buttons there to navigate our way through the code. You can also use the keyboard shortcuts, and this is what I prefer to do. F9, F10, and F11 all supply the ability to, the F9 will set a breakpoint, F10 will step through, and F11 will step over. Let's move on to some of the windows. I'm only going to talk about 2 of the windows for right now. The first one is the locals window, and the locals will have a reference to all the objects that currently are within scope to the method that we're currently in. So in terms of, now that we're running btn find underscore click, we have 3 objects in the locals window. The me, which refers to the form itself in which this btn find click event resides. Then we have the sender and the e-objects. Both of these have been passed in to our event. So what I can do is drill down and take a look at each of the objects that are contained, or methods that are contained by the form itself, the me. And so I can click txt company name. I can see all the properties and the values for those properties. I can even take a look at the text, which currently is United Package. And so I can do that for each of the buttons and each of the text boxes and the labels that are on my form. And the same thing would be true with sender. I can take a look at its object model and what is currently contained in there, if anything. The last thing I want to show you is the watch window. And the watch window is neat because you can define what variables or what properties you want to keep an eye on. So in this case, what I'll probably wind up doing is just hitting the run until we get to this company name variable. And I want to keep an eye on what the value of company name is, as well as all of the private member variables for the shippers class. So what I can do is just highlight it and then drag and drop it into my watch window. And it'll show you the current value and what type it is. As I'm running my application, I'm stepping through code. Using my step over button. Notice that I'm back into my form, and therefore company name and phone are out of scope for my current line of code that's executing. So this only becomes useful whenever you are in scope for a given class or method. So let's continue to walk through our code. And here I'm going to click just change the company name, and by doing so it fires off the set company name property, and it's going to set that value as I hover my mouse cursor over to Federal Savings, and it's currently Federal Shipping. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm changing it to Federal Shipping, so I just added an S on the end. So now when I step into that next line of code to actually perform this assignment, notice that Federal Shippings is now displayed in M company name. Additionally, it's in red, which means that something just changed, and it's alerting us to that visually by the use of the red color. Now, it only lasts for one line of code execution, so the next line of code that I step into, you'll notice that I guess it went out of scope for starters, but also had it not gone out of scope, it would have turned back to the black color. So this is a way that we can peek in on the value of objects and variables that are within our application. Now there's a ton of other techniques that I can show you, like keeping track of all the breakpoints and enabling and disabling breakpoints. And by the way, breakpoints are saved with your project, so even if you shut down your Visual Studio.NET session, the next time you bring that project back up, those breakpoints will still be in there. So there's a lot of things that I can show you with this, but these few tips will get you a long way in debugging your applications or trying to review what somebody else has done, which I highly encourage as a learning tool. So go on, open up Lesson 22's lesson text, take a look at the exercise, and then open up Lesson 20's source code like I've done, and try to do exactly what I've done here. Just step through the code and see if you can get the hang of it using both the debug toolbar and also the keyboard shortcuts like we talked about, and using the different windows, the watch windows, the local windows, and so on. Happy debugging!